You know, when we think about the Battle of Yorktown, we usually see it as the final chapter of the American Revolution. But what's often missed is that for the British, this defeat wasn't just an ending. Oh no, it was the beginning of a massive political firestorm in London that would completely reshape their government. So let's get into how one loss on the battlefield nearly brought down the entire British state.
That right there, that's the raw, panicked reaction of the British Prime Minister Lord North the second he got the news from Yorktown. This wasn't some calculated political statement, it was pure shock. I mean, picture it. It's November 25th, 1781, and the most powerful man in the British Empire has just realized his entire world is falling apart.
And this is the central puzzle, isn't it? Because, militarily speaking, the war wasn't necessarily lost. Britain still held major cities like New York and Charleston. So why on earth did the surrender of about 8,000 soldiers at Yorktown signal the end of the entire war? Well, the answer isn't found on the battlefield. It's found in the halls of Parliament.
Yeah, that news from Yorktown, it didn't just sail across the Atlantic. It slammed into the British political system with the force of a tidal wave.
Okay, so check out this timeline. The news hits London on November 25th, and just 2 days later, King George III stands up in Parliament and basically doubles down. He admits there were some unfortunate events in Virginia, but he makes it crystal clear. We're not stopping, the war is going on. He was absolutely determined not to lose America. What he didn't realize was that he was about to face a whole new rebellion, this time from inside his own government.
And this, right here, is where a military crisis turns into a full-blown constitutional crisis. That defeat at Yorktown lit a fuse on a fundamental power struggle that had been simmering for years. Who was really in charge of the country? Was it the king, or was it Parliament?
See, on one side, you had the king's traditional authority, which was rooted in this idea called the royal prerogative. For centuries, it was just accepted that the monarch handled foreign policy. Declaring war, making peace treaties, that was the king's gig, not Parliament's.
But, and this is a huge but, this slide really shows you the central conflict. The king could declare all the wars he wanted, but Parliament held the ultimate trump card, the power of the purse. No new taxes, no money for the army, no funding for the navy could happen without a vote in the House of Commons. So the king could want to fight forever, but he couldn't do it if Parliament wouldn't pay the bills.
After Yorktown, this wasn't some abstract theoretical debate anymore. Oh no, it became a very real, very urgent crisis. The king and his government were dead set on continuing the fight. But a whole bunch of MPs were now looking at the situation and thinking, this war is a lost cause. We're just throwing good money after bad. And they were getting ready to use their financial power to pull the plug.
So what happens next? Well, this tension explodes into one of the most dramatic political showdowns in British history. And it all plays out in a series of absolutely nail-biting votes in the House of Commons.
At first, the government looked pretty solid. On November 27th, right after the king's big defiant speech, they won a vote with a comfortable majority of 89. But then, look what happens. Just 2 weeks later, on a vote to declare the war was basically pointless, that majority gets slashed in half, down to just 41. The independent MPs, kind of the swing voters of their day, were starting to have serious doubts.
And then came the moment the opposition tried to force the issue. On February 22nd, 1782, they put forward a motion to end all offensive operations in America. The government scrambled, they twisted arms, they did everything they could. And the motion failed by a single vote, 1. The government survived, but only by the skin of its teeth.
But the opposition knew they had the momentum. They could smell blood in the water. So just 5 days later, on February 27th, they brought forward pretty much the exact same motion. And this time, the dam just broke. The motion passed, the government was defeated by 19 votes. The House of Commons had officially voted to end the American War.
And you have to understand, this was a huge deal. It was a direct constitutional challenge to the king. Parliament wasn't just giving advice anymore, it was dictating war policy, stepping right on that royal prerogative. They had seized control, and the king's government had totally lost its authority to govern.
Now, for most prime ministers, a historic defeat like that would mean one thing: immediate resignation. But this wasn't a normal situation, because Lord North didn't just work for Parliament. He worked for a king who absolutely refused to admit defeat.
So you get this totally bizarre, unprecedented constitutional standoff. Parliament has voted to end the war, but the king won't fire the prime minister who lost the vote, and the prime minister won't quit without the king's permission. The government was in a state of paralysis, defeated but still in office. A zombie government, really.
And you can feel the tension right here, in Lord North's own words. He actually had to write this letter to the king to explain the new reality. He's basically saying, Your Majesty, with all due respect, in this country you can't just ignore the House of Commons. Their decision, it has to win in the end.
The king was completely cornered. The thought of losing America was so devastating to him personally that he did something absolutely extraordinary. He secretly wrote up a letter of abdication. He was more willing to give up his crown than to approve American independence. I mean, just think about that. That's how high the stakes had become.
In the end, though, the king didn't abdicate. He blinked. And in doing so, he accidentally helped create a new, unwritten rule that would define British politics forever.
So after a few more weeks of intense pressure and more votes that were way too close for comfort, Lord North finally resigned on March 20th. And King George was then forced to do the one thing he dreaded most: appoint a new government led by men he hated, whose main job was to negotiate the peace and independence he had fought so hard to stop.
And this is the ultimate legacy of the whole affair. This crisis locked in a core principle of modern democratic government, what we now call ministerial responsibility, or having the confidence of the House. A government can't just be picked by the king or queen, it must have the support of the elected members of parliament. If it loses a major vote, loses their confidence, it has to resign. This wasn't a law that was passed, it was a powerful precedent set by this very crisis.
So when you trace it all back, it's pretty incredible. An American victory at Yorktown didn't just create a new country, it forced a constitutional showdown in London that ended with Parliament finally establishing its supremacy over the king, changing the balance of power and the future of the British government forever.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating what if, doesn't it? We know what happened because the king, in the end, bowed to political reality. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd actually sent that abdication letter, choosing his personal principles over his crown? You just have to wonder how different history might have been.